You'll have some slides you go through first, right? Okay, gotcha. Yeah, isn't there like start of like all your meetings or whatever? You go through like the stuff for the week, or okay, so I'm good to just start, I guess then. Okay, cool. I'll give it a couple more minutes. Oh, also, could you make me co-host so I can screen share? Yep. Good question. I don't know. I just take like random like screenshots of stuff from Blender and I don't know, just throw shit in. Yeah, I don't know. I looked at the slides I did last year for these workshops. I was like, wow, these are like kind of shitty. I should do better. Let's start late. Sits at 5. There's the HEB. It's a little bit north, about a mile, I guess. I guess there's obviously that like Target. But on 24th Street, if you go down a ways, there at least used to be a pretty nice like corner store type thing. But I don't know how many of those like West Campus like small stores have like survived. Mm-hmm. 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 Okay. Okay, 6:05, so I guess I'll get started. All right, so hello and welcome to the Intro to UV Mapping and Texturing with Blender workshop. So I guess quick disclaimer before we get into things. I'm going to be using Blender and Paint.net, but any image editing program will work for this. But this is just going to be over like the very basics. Better software actually exists for doing this stuff. So some things you might want to check out if you want to get like really into like making like nice textures for your models are 3D code, which is really good for making like hand painted and like stylized stuff. And then there's a Substance Designer and Substance Painter. Substance Designer is more for, I guess, like tech art type stuff, making like cool like procedural materials. Then Substance Painter is it allows you to use those, and I think it's also similar to like 3D code in a way, allowing you to do some like hand painted stuff. There's a way to do that in Blender too, but it's not super fleshed out. Yeah. So anyways, today I'll be going over 3 different methods for texturing models. The first being sort of like the correct, like a traditional way of doing stuff, which is making like a nice UV map and then making a texture from that. And then I'll be talking about some ways to sort of like cheat and use gradients and color palettes, where you can make a sort of like messy UV map for your model, and then just sort of like drag faces onto like different parts of your color palette or your gradient. And then the third one's kind of a meme. I don't know if you know the show Chowder, but there's a way they, I don't know, do materials on like clothing, where it's sort of this like static image that, I don't know, like the characters sort of like scroll across. But I'll use that to talk about some just other cool shader stuff you can do. So anyways, so what is UV mapping? UV mapping or unwrapping is, you'll sometimes like hear it called, is the process of like laying out the faces of your mesh in a 2D space so that images and textures map cleanly like onto it, hence the name. And it's very similar to like making a papercraft template of your model. And just because I know some people might be curious, U and V are actually the ATSIs of the 2D texture. And that's because ATS Y and Z are like, those are like 3D space. U and V are like local to the surface of the model, if that makes sense. I thought UV was like an acronym for the longest time. Yeah. And, oh yeah, if you look at, I don't know, this image of this like cube with the UV map next to it on the right, you can sort of see, I don't know what it looks like when you have a UV map. It's just like the bot's like cut open and like laid out flat. And here's another example of that, is the soda can. These rotor lines are like cuts that have been made along the mesh, so when it gets unwrapped, it'll like lay out cleanly. And once you have the UV map in an image editing software, it's really easy to just sort of like draw over that to like make your texture, which is what I did for this like soda can here. This is not a super great UV map, by the way, but just an example. And before we hop into Blender, just some quick tips or some things to keep in mind when you're doing your UV unwrapping and mapping. Is you want to make cuts along the mesh so it will, I don't know, unfold cleanly with like minimized distortion. I don't know, you want all your faces to be like, I don't know, the same like proportional size that they are like actually on the mesh when they're like laid out flat. And you also want things to, I don't know, unwrap in a way where you don't have like a lot of curvature, so it's easy to like draw on it. And also, if you look at this image on the right, you have a lot of options when you're unwrapping a mesh, and I'll go through these when we hop into Blender. But it's good to like keep them in mind. You don't just have to use that top one, which is like unwrap for like your entire model. There's some ways you can, I don't know, make certain things easier. And the last thing to keep in mind is when you're making this UV map, you want to give the parts of the mesh that need the most amount of detail the most room. So if you're modeling a character, the face will probably need more detail than like a hand or something. So it's a good idea to like make that larger. So yeah. So on that note, if you downloaded the zip file that was included in the announcement and open up the can Blender file, we can sort of hop into doing some things and like messing around, unwrapping. I need to change my screen share.
And the zip file is just going to be in the EGaDS events channel on your Discord. Zip file called 3D Texturing Workshop.
It's actually showing the chat pane, like on stream.
I don't think so.
Okay, cool. I was just making sure like the zoom overlay was not, I don't know, showing up.
Yeah, it's showing.
But you can see Blender and stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay, so I guess to show off the basics, before we mess with the soda can, let's just sort of move this to the side first, and let's insert a cube. So go up to Add, Mesh, and then just insert a cube. And I'm just gonna drag this up. So when you're doing UV editing stuff, you're gonna wanna go into the UV editing tab up top. So you'll see modeling, sculpting, and then UV editing. And this will give you two panes, one that shows you the UV mapping stuff, and then one that just shows you your object. So in your object pane, you're gonna wanna press tab to go into edit mode. And with all the faces selected, you'll see the UV map that's that I guess correlates with them. So by default, this cube has a pretty nice UV map already. And that's because Blender just made all their primitives have nice UV maps by default. But let's actually mess this up and sort of redo this just to get the idea of how you would make cuts along this cube to like get this clean UV map for it. So in your object pane on the right, go up to UV and let's just do project from view, which this is kind of gross. You have like faces overlapping each other. And if we hit unwrap right now, it doesn't go back to the way it was before. And that's because we don't have any cuts on this cube. So it doesn't know what to do. There's no way this can unfold. So to make cuts along this cube, what we can do is we can just select the edges we want to make cuts along. So to get this sort of like cross shape that we had before, we'll just select these sides, and you'll have these not be cuts here because we want this to like, I don't know, fold out, sort of like wings. And we have a cut here. I think this should be good. And okay, once you have all those edges selected, you're gonna wanna right click and you're going to hit Mark Seam on the dropdown. And once you have these marked and you're sure everything's good, you can just hit the unwrap button. Or actually, JK, press A to select all the faces, because if you don't do that, it only unwraps the faces you have selected. So press A to select them all, and then you can unwrap. And we're back to having this nice cross. And if you want this centered, what you can do is this UV vertex thing here that shows you the coordinates is not already showing up. You can just press in to get it to pop out. And instead of this having at like 0.375 or whatever, we can just set this to 0.5 and that'll center it. So just to talk about some of the options we have in this UV pane. So up top, you'll notice we have these selection methods that are very similar to like the edit mode selection, the vertex, the edge, and face select. And we have all of those, but we also have this fourth one, which is island select. So any faces that are connected to each other in your UV map, you can select them all at once and drag them around. Also very similar to edit mode, we have our move tool, we have our rotate mode tool, and we have our scale tool. And same hotkeys for those as in edit mode. R to rotate, and you have your window that'll allow you to do that exactly. So if you want to rotate this 90 degrees, you can. And then we also have our scale tool. And these come in handy when we're working with more complex maps and we want to move different parts of it around and maybe even like rotate them, as we probably will later. We'll get to that. Okay, so this is one way to unwrap this cube. But if we want to, I don't know, maybe we have a texture already made, like a pixel art texture for this. So if you go ahead and you go over to materials for this cube and you assign this orange bots texture to it. And I actually designed this texture in mind for a cube that's 2 by 3 or 3 by 2 rather. So the idea here is I have this like fruit bots texture, and you can view this texture by opening it up in your UV pane. So we see this texture and we want to make the faces of our UV map line up with this. So we have our side, we have both sides, and then we have a top for the spots here. So first thing we actually want to do after changing the dimensions of our cube is we're going to want to apply the scale. It's always important when you're doing UV unwrapping that your scale is 1 for all your axes. Otherwise, it can lead to some weird like distortion stuff. Okay, so as you'll probably notice, this cross does not line up with the texture we have here. So one cool thing you can do when you're unwrapping is when you unwrap, you only unwrap the face you have selected. And when that gets unwrapped, it will be made as large as it possibly can in the UV map. So when you have all those faces selected, it makes it the same size, I guess, as all the other faces, or same size relative to them. But if you unwrap it by itself, it'll make it as large as possible. And first thing you might notice here is this is the wrong way for how we want to, I don't know, map this face onto this texture. So what we can do is we can rotate, and we want to rotate this in 90 degrees. That's facing the correct way. And also we want this UV map to lock cleanly onto these pixels. So one thing you can do, and this is really good when you're working with pixel art textures, or anything you want to be like really precise with, is you can actually snap to pixels. And we want to snap our vertices to the corner of the pixels. So now when we like scale this or we move it around, it just snaps. Does it? Maybe I shouldn't have scaled it. Anyways, we can probably fix this by doing an exact coordinate. Does this not work how I thought it did? Anyways, I know what's going on there, but the idea here is you can sort of drag this around and you can even move these vertices to sort of lot to the edges of this face here. So really quickly, you could drag these and that almost lines up. Again, I don't know why it's not working properly. This might be a Blender glitch because I've done this before. It worked properly. But anyways, you can just go around and you can unwrap each of these faces by themselves. And yeah, actually this was not the right side even. Yeah. So no, you can drag this face to that. Then you could go to the other side and do the same thing. And you don't even have to unwrap it again. Like, you can move the individual vertices around, and it'll work. Yeah, is anyone confused about this? Because this is a lot of info, especially if you've never done this before. So when you're yeah. So as the main key points here have been, I don't know, when you're making a UV map for your mesh, I don't know, you have all these different things you can mess with here. So unwrap will just use the cuts you've made, or we'll take the face or faces you've selected, and it will do its best to unwrap them according to those cuts. Obviously, if you only have one face, that's pretty easy for it to do. It'll just take that shape and it'll put it onto a plane. If you don't have cuts between two faces or multiple faces, I'd actually show you what would happen. It's generally not pretty. So if we just go into edge mode and we clear the seams on all these, and then maybe we select everything but the top, because if you have an enclosed object and you try to unwrap it, it doesn't work. But if you try to unwrap all these, it doesn't really know what to do. So this is actually, what was it, the bottom face I had selected, and then these are the sides. And this is really hard to work with, especially if you're like trying to draw on this. So yeah. Yeah. That's for doing like sort of pixel art stuff. Once you have your UVs laid out correctly with your mesh, I talked a little about this earlier when I was talking about sort of being able to like hand paint and like draw on your meshes once you have like UVs laid out. And usually using something like 3D Coat or a program that's designed for that stuff is best, but there actually is this texture paint tab up top. And this is sort of Blender's version of that. So if you go into this and you have like your material pulled up, over here, we can actually draw on this. Let's choose a color that's not white so it shows up better. So yeah, once you have UVs laid out for an object, what you can do is you just sort of paint on it. And if you set this radius down to like 1, you could do it on like a per pixel basis, I guess. Although it's a bit finicky. There might be plugins and like mods for Blender that like I don't know, add more functionality to the texture paint mode, but I think it's pretty basic, just the built-in stuff. Yeah, something to keep in mind. So yeah, that's sort of like the basics, but that's just like a box. So we can play around doing something a bit more complicated here, and that would be this can. So if you're in the texture view, you'll probably notice I have this like can already made. Here that I already did the UVs for, but this can here on the left, I haven't done the UV mapping for, so that's what I'm gonna walk you through. But just to see what we're aiming for, if you go into the UV mode on this one with the sample can texture pulled up here, you'll see this is sort of how you would want to lay out your UVs for an object like this. So how do we do that? So the first thing we're probably going to want to do here is we're going to want to think about where we want the most detail on this. And that's probably going to be the sides where you'd have like your logos, nutritional fats, whatever. Because I don't know, the top and bottom of the scan are probably going to be like a solid color or just some sort of like metallic material. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make cuts along these faces, or along these edges, to sort of separate this mid section of the can out from the rest of it. So we'll select those edge rings, and you can do that by pressing Shift-Alt and then clicking on just one of the edges in the ring. And we can just mark those as seams. And we're also going to want to make one vertical seam along this, so it will unfold and not be like a ring in the UV map. So I'm going to mark a seam here. And before we unwrap these faces, we're also going to want to make cuts on this top part. And I can show you what would happen if we don't do these real quick. So we go ahead and just unwrap these faces. You'll see that there's this sort of curve, this whole midsection. And that's because these are not unfolding properly. We want them to be sort of like I guess, individual and sticking straight up from the mid, or these like other faces beneath them. So if we mark these all as seams, and then we unwrap these faces again, you'll see that this is much cleaner than it was before. It doesn't have that curvature to it. So when you're trying to draw on this, I don't know, you can like draw a straight line across it and it'll actually show up as a straight line going around the soda can. Otherwise it'd be like really distorted. And also the reason I'm only selecting the faces that I'm currently in the process of unwrapping is, again, it will take the stuff you have selected and it'll make it as big as possible as it can on the UV map. And I actually want this to stretch all the way across the texture. If I were to try unwrapping everything together at this point, it actually works out. But sometimes you'll see it'll like try to maybe put this section or something like up here, and this part will be like scaled down and it'll like only like reach up to that. So just to make sure this gets the maximum like width possible across the texture, it's generally good just to like only select these faces when they're the ones that you're unwrapping. And the rest of this mesh actually doesn't need that much work. I don't know. For the texture that I actually used when I was making this, I knew that I was just going to have a solid color for the top part and like, I don't know, the can tab and like the bottom. So we can actually just select these faces, and instead of making any cuts on them, which you'd want to do to make them, I don't know, unfold cleanly if you're actually adding like detail to them. But if you're just doing a solid color, a sort of cheat you can do is you can just do a project from view unwrap for these faces. So because we have like vertical sections to this, I forgot to select those, but because there are vertical sections to this, these do not actually really show up in this map. They're totally being overlapped, which would be a problem if we like tried to draw on them. But because they're going to be a solid color, that's fine. So anything that's going to be a solid color in your texture, you can just sort of, I don't know, hack the UVs if they're not like going to be important. And we can do the same thing for like the can tab and the drink hole. And you could do project from view if you wanted this to be, since it's flat, you could get like perfect UVs for this. If you wanted it to be like the same rotation, everything is actually is on the mesh, but because we don't really care, it can be this weird rotated, distorted shape. That's fine. Same goes for the soda can tab. By default, for whatever reason, it wrote this into like multiple islands, even though it's all connected. So just to make that a bit cleaner, we can select all these faces. Good way to do that would just be to go into wireframe mode, and then dread select, which you can do with Control B, by the way. And then just unselect anything that's not the can tab. And then again, we can just press the Z axis to select this orthographic top-down view, and we can project from view, and that gives us the entire can tab. And I think I wanted mine to be pink, so that works. And yeah, so now that we have this unwrapped, the biggest thing you might notice is we probably want the midsection to not be rotated the way it is. We probably want this. In my texture, you'll see I actually did the midsection across the bottom of the texture. So we want to probably move this down here just because it's easier to work with. You don't want to be like drawing to the side if you're doing this in a different software, if you're not actually like drawing on the can. So again, you can press R to rotate this, and we want to rotate this exactly 90 degrees. And if you have this UV vertex menu popped up, which you can do by pressing N, we can make this 0.5 to center it. And again, if we have snapped pixels selected, we should be able to just drag this down, and it should snap to the bottom cleanly, but it's not. Even if it's not snapping cleanly, what you can do actually is you can just sort of play with the coordinates of it until it's where you want it. Probably something like that. And if you're not doing like a pixel art texture, this doesn't have to be super exact. If you have more resolution than like 256 by 256 pixels, if things are not perfectly lined up, no one's really going to notice. So yeah, once you have your UVs laid out and you're ready to like paint over them and make a texture, to export this to a image editing software, or just export this as a PNG, you can just go up to UV, and then you can do export UV layout. And you just name this something like can UV PNG. And I don't know, you go into like paint.net or whatever you're using, you can just open up that image, and you can, I don't know, make a new layer and just sort of like draw whatever you want. And having the UV layout does not need to be part of your actual texture. You're going to want to keep this on a separate layer, and you're going to want to remove it at the end. It's really just guidelines so you know where you're like drawing stuff. So no, straight Coke or whatever soda name you want on it. Add your like nutritional material info. And yeah. You should probably do it on a layer that's like under the UV map, just so you have the guidelines. So now, any questions about this?
Is Pepsi a legal knockoff of a common soft drink brand?
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of like McDonald's, just Pepsi. Have any anime done that? Is Pepsi canon somewhere?
Probably.
No, it's a meme, but
Knock back a cold, crisp bottle of Pepsi.
cold can of Pepsi. So it's some basics about I don't know, the proper way to do stuff. Main thing is you just want to, I don't know, make cuts along your mesh so you can like lay out these faces in a way that it's just easy to draw on them. However you're doing that, whether you're drawing directly on the mesh, whether you're making a texture in a separate image editing software. Yeah. So I don't know, on your own you can play around with those, but those are sort of the basics. So yeah, I guess from here I'll go back in the slides and talk about some of our other methods. So one that I like to do a lot, because UV unwrapping can be a huge pain. It can also be very time consuming to make like a detailed like texture for an object. So something faster you can do, and this is really good for game jams, is you can actually use color palettes or gradients to texture stuff. And this actually saves a lot of space because these textures can be like really small. Like this Pico 8 color palette here is 32 by 32, although it could even be 4 by 4. These could each be a pixel. And if you look at this sort of, I don't know, example I have here, you can see this color palette being used to texture this like a swordfish sword. And yeah, you can make whole games just using one color palette that just like all the objects use. And you can use gradients in a very similar way. This example comes from Minions Art on Twitter. You should follow them. They have a lot of cool stuff that they post. But here you can see them using a gradient just to sort of texture this tree. And I know it shows them doing a planar unwrap. Maybe they're using Maya or something, but that's just sort of similar to doing like an orthographic view of a model and then doing a projection unwrap. So they did like this projection unwrap of like the trunk, and then they like stretched those UVs across like the brown gradients. Same thing for like the cubes that make up like the foliage, etc. So yeah, if we hop back into Blender, I can show a quick example of something like this. So if you like copy your soda can, get a new one, and you add the Pico 8 palette material to it, and you open that up in the UV unwrap view. And you also just like clear all of the seams that you made. Make sure, again, to do this on a copy of your soda can so you don't mess up any of the work you did on the first one. What we can do is we can just, I don't know, if you know sort of like the color blocks you want to use for the different parts of this mesh, you could just do, you'd select those faces and you could just do like a project from view or a normal unwrap. And then all you want to do is in the UV pane is just scale those down and then drag them to the color you want. So set the mid section, drag it to pink. Same with top and bottom. Make these gray. We go to the hole. The black, etc. So that's like really quick. It can take you like less than a minute just to touch your entire model. And looks like all right if you're going for like a really low poly style with like not a lot of detail. Perfectly fine. And again, especially great for game jams just because of how fast it is. Because I don't know, if you're doing 3D modeling, you probably also don't want to be like doing texturing on top of that. It's a lot of work. So yeah, that is our second method. And then our last one is the chowder method. So I guess just to give context on this, if you've never watched Chowder, don't know about the effect I'm talking about, this clip will sort of show it. So if you look at Chowder's clothing here, you'll notice that he's moving around, and like the clothing pattern does not distort with him. He's just sort of scrolling along it. Same thing is being done for this dude's shirt. You'll see him moving, but the image that's the texture for his shirt stays completely static. So yeah, we go back into the slides. So I thought this was funny, but the way you can like replicate this in Unity is by using the actual screen space is the UV space. And I was able to accomplish this by doing a very simple shader graph shader. And you probably can't really see it in this image. There's a better picture of the setup actually in the files in the zip folder that y'all downloaded. Just hop into Unity and like show off like what this looks like. Yeah, you'll see this image is completely static. And we can move our mesh around, but yeah. And just sort of explain what's going on here. Let's pop this out. Basically, all this is doing is it's taking the screen position, it's taking the RNG channels of this, which are really just the X and Y coordinates of the screen. It's throwing those into vector 2 that's being multiplied with another vector 2 that's comprised of the width of the screen being divided by the width of our texture. And then the same thing with the height. So the height of the screen is divided by the height of the texture, throw that into vector 2, multiply it with this. And then you can plug into the UV for material. And then you use the texture that you have, and you put that onto like the base color. And this is an unlit material, but you can do this with lit materials, same idea. Yeah. The reason I'm showing this off is because there's sort of a lot of cool hats you can do with the shaders to texture objects. This is just one. So like if you wanted to have your UVs be in world space for maybe like the grass in Animal Crossing or like the paths or whatever in that game, they use the world space for the UVs for those because it's like a large repeating texture. No. There's just a lot of cool stuff you can do with shaders, and Alex will actually be going over some shader and shader graph stuff in the Nets workshop. So you should definitely check that out because it's just another way you can like texture stuff without even having to mess with like UVs a lot of the time.
Thank you for the plug. Also, I just now got how this shader graph works. Even though you showed me it before, I just now understand it. Which may mean it is pretty complicated. So can I try to explain it and you can tell me if it's a right or wrong way of thinking about it?
Sure, because I don't fully understand it myself. I just know it kind of works.
Okay, so I think the way it's doing it is kind of similar to how you take the shape of your model in Blender and put it onto a 2D sprite. You're kind of like taking the boundary of the object that you put the shader graph on, and you're using that to kind of like take out a part of the texture.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So it's almost like you're doing a projection unwrap of your character model every frame.
Yeah, and it's doing it. Yeah, that essentially is what's going on here. That might be super. Well, I don't know if that's expensive. I don't know how efficient this is. I know nothing about, I don't know, tech art stuff, but yeah.
Okay, well, it's confusing, but hopefully if you come to next week's workshop about shader graphs, you'll be able to understand it a little bit more.
Back in the slides. I think that was basically everything I have. Yeah, if anyone has any questions about UV unwrapping, I'd be glad to answer them. I don't know, a lot of stuff I probably talked about was like kind of confusing and a lot, and I don't know if I did the best job. But yeah, just to semi-close out here, some cool resources you can look at to like help you, I don't know, study this stuff on your own. Again, Minions Art, who I pulled that sample from, they post a lot of cool shader stuff, and also like texturing tips, like the thing I showed. Mort, they have some cool, both texturing and just like low poly modeling tutorials on their YouTube. I think they work at Mojang now, so they probably stopped making videos. But still, they have some good stuff that they've already made that you can look through. Model resource, they have a bunch of models from games that have been like ripped. And you can just like open those up and you can like look at the UVs and stuff and sort of figure out how AAA companies have sort of like made their stuff in the past. And then the club Discord, just a cool artist Discord. They have a lot of resources for people doing like 3D art. Good place to go, ask questions, get feedback. So yeah. And yeah, that's everything I have. And if no one has any questions, then I guess I'm done. Yeah. I hope this was informative. Thanks for having me.
All right. Okay, so I'll probably stop the stream now.